Such a pleasure to be here, although this is the fourth instance of our Summer Institute, and it's been an amazing ride. My name is Heidi Keeler. For those of you who don't know who I am a College of Nursing faculty, and I am the director of the Office of Community Engagement at UNMC. And then I serve as a community liaison on the Great Plains IDSCTR in this core, as Dr. King said. This is just such a perfect presentation topic for me because it just ties in so well with the communication message that falls into my role. And then all of the information that we've heard so far is just critical to that. So Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Emily Frankel, and I am the Practice-Based Research Network Coordinator for the Great Plains IDSCTR. And I've recently come on as the Community Engagement and Outreach Core Coordinator as well. I have my master's in public health and quite a few years of human subjects research experience. And a lot of this work in dissemination that we're going to talk about ties in nicely with my work leading the Practice-Based Research Network. So we're really excited to inform you all of dissemination to community members tonight. And I think it ties in nicely with Aurelie and Devin's presentations. So we're really excited to get started.
And the way that we're going to do this presentation is really conversational. And Emily and I will be just bouncing ideas and information back and forth. And also, you're all expected to participate in this as well. And what we really want to do is to show you that that dissemination is really part of the cyclical nature of research, recruitment, retention, et cetera, and that community engagement is central to that. Emily and I have put together a question for you. Emily, do you want to present this for us?
Yes. So before we dive into dissemination, we want you guys to put in the chat, or it's kind of a small group, you can even just unmute yourselves and shout out loud. What are your preferred methods to deliver and receive information regarding your research or others? And I'll have Heidi moderate the chat here.
Somehow I got muted there. So far, we've got read it, email, giving talks, email updates from different organizations, town hall meetings, newspaper articles, interview with local community journalists. That is not fun for me. Conference presentations, written reports, talks, networks, all sorts of different ideas. Newspapers, podcasts, that's an up and coming one. So peer-reviewed publications, all sorts of different ways to communicate information. And so all of these things, Google Scholar, that's an interesting one. And so ResearchGate, yes, another way to disseminate information. And so we keep saying disseminate, but if you've been a part of the Institute for all four instances, you know that disseminate actually means something else. So, Emily?
Oh, I thought this was you.
All right, I'll definitely take it. Dissemination versus dissemination. Why are there two instances of dissemination in community engaged research? Dissemination and implementation research, and then we talk about dissemination of information once we're done with the study. So why are there two disseminations, and what do they even mean? So it's very important, as was defined before, that dissemination research is the scientific study of how information is distributed and how it is used in public health or clinical practice to integrate knowledge and evidence-based interventions into a population. Whereas dissemination of research is a planned out process in which you are delivering information from research studies and such to different populations. So one is the scientific study of delivering information, usually information that is intended to be taken up by a population and used, integrated into that population. Whereas dissemination of the research it's basically communication of what was done.
So there's quite a few points to consider when planning your dissemination. And I real quickly wanted to throw up this definition of dissemination. It's by the AHRQ, or the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, but the process of sharing research findings with stakeholders and wider audiences. So this is the definition of dissemination that we're going to be working off of tonight. So the first thing you kind of want to consider when creating a dissemination plan is, why are you doing this? What's the purpose for your dissemination? Then you're going to move on to the what, or the product. What are you going to deliver to the community? And the whom will be your audience, but also who's involved in this dissemination plan. The how can be kind of like the product. So is it going to be a publication? Is it going to be a presentation? How are you delivering this message? And the when, Aurelie previously talked about timing and how timing is key. And same thing holds true for disseminating information back to the community. And dissemination is critical for community engagement and as a community engagement strategy, and should be considered early on for successful adoption and the translation of research findings. Other key considerations regarding the messaging of your dissemination is your message should be clear, it should be targeted, it should be actionable, it should be repeated, and it should be factually correct, which is very important. And later on, we're going to share resources with you on how you can create a dissemination plan and products that are appropriate for the audience that you are trying to get the message across to. So you might see the title of the slide and be like, dissemination, recruitment, why are those in the same sentence? So we want you to think about dissemination early on in the research process. That's something that we just mentioned. And it can aid in recruitment and retention for your studies, which might seem a little bit backwards because most people probably think dissemination is something that you do as one of the last steps in your research process. So there was a 2014 journal article titled "Use of Community Engagement Strategies to Increase Research Participation in Practice-Based Research Networks." And in this article, the authors examined the extent to which the practice-based research networks used community engagement strategies and different approaches to impact their recruitment and retention. So just real briefly, I just want to mention what a practice-based research network is for those of you who may be unfamiliar with this topic. But they're typically a group of clinicians or practices that work together to answer community-based research questions and then translate that into research findings. So some of the PBRN work can be similar to the dissemination that Dr. Estabrooks talked about in week 2, where you are delivering, evidence-based materials for uptake, but it can also be dissemination of research findings like we're talking about tonight. And PBRNs are a great way to recruit a representative sample and to target those individuals who may not receive their care at an academic medical center. And ultimately, this is going to improve the external validity of your study by recruiting individuals from across the region and that make up the representative sample. So that's really important in research. So getting back to how dissemination and recruitment kind of tie together. So the results of this study found that the PBRNs that used community engagement strategies like building trust, enhancing communication, teaming up with their clinical partners, and disseminating findings, they were more successful in the recruitment of racial and ethnic individuals in their studies, which is what this article was specifically looking at, was the recruitment of different racial and ethnic communities. So those who engaged in these types of community engaged strategies, they were more successful in their recruitment plans. So if we look at this graph on the screen here, I want to draw your attention to the far right where that red arrow is. And what this is showing is that those who, the whole graph as a whole shows like what percentage of the PBRNs engage in different implementation and community engaged strategies. But if you look at the very end here where the red arrow is, only 24% of PBRNs involve their partners in reporting, and that is defined as the dissemination of their research findings. So a relatively small percent of PBRNs are actually disseminating findings back to the community. So we know that all of these different community engaged strategies are beneficial for recruitment. So we need to draw more attention to this dissemination and getting those findings back to the community. And involving partners in dissemination in these strategies can overall improve the retention and also contribute to participation in future research studies when you're delivering these findings and information back to the community, which is kind of summed up in this model that we have here. So community engagement, recruitment, and dissemination, those three components make up this cyclical process. And like a circle, there's no beginning, there's no end, and it's an ongoing process. But for the sake of this diagram, engaging the community should be the first thing that you think about when working in community engaged research. And that's something that has been mentioned throughout our entire research institute, is the importance of engaging the community early on and through all the steps of your research. So building relationships with the community should be built on mutual trust, as shown by that center circle. And trust is enhanced by building and enhancing engagement with the community partners in the research design and research workflow. You also want to include the community in designing and tailoring specific community documents that you'll be sharing. All of these things are going to ultimately build trust and aid in this circle of engaging the community and them wanting to participate in the research and disseminating the findings back to them. It's just going to create this really nice cyclic process where the community feels really engaged in the research and like their voice is being heard throughout this research process.
Okay, so we need to take a moment now that we've defined dissemination and how it is just critical for retention and recruitment of your communities. But we have to take a moment and ask ourselves, what are the motivators of doing this? What's the purpose of doing this? And how is it perceived based on who you're talking about? So we just heard amazing presentations by Rayleigh and Devin about how important it is to target your information based on who you're talking to and how important it is to be with your community so that you know who they are and what motivates them. And, one of the challenges that is common to both researchers and to the community is we have limited time, we have limited resources, and we're really trying to balance all of the demands of our job, all of the demands of the research protocol, and maintaining relationships while we're doing it. And so it is a major challenge that there is time that's invested in building relationship, which is great for building trust and increasing the recruitment and retention of your studies. But at the same time, it's really important, since we have both researchers and community members here, to understand that for the academic, we are judged by the products more than we're judged by the process. And so it's really important when you're thinking about dissemination strategies to incorporate process metrics into there so that you can see not only the change in outcomes, but also the change in relationships, the growing of relationships, the maintaining of relationships. And in doing so, that directly contributes to that competing demand problem that researchers have. Now, at the same time, our community members, unless you are extremely interested in research and all of the intricacies of it, researchers or community members really, their motivation is the work that surrounds their daily life. And so if it's on a professional level, does the research contribute to the mission of their institution? And what is the burden on the institution? And then in personal domains, what is the motivation to participate in the study based on, the match? And so what dissemination can do is really bridge that gap and make the results and the effort known, and depending on the intentionality of the dissemination, it can also directly contribute to the overall missions of both entities. So again, considering this, again, there's that word trust and mutual benefits for the dissemination strategies and products that you have. It is also interesting to consider that disseminating the findings to the research participants is of utmost importance. And if at all possible, disseminating those to those who participated, if possible, is first of mind, really, at least it should be, on top of or in front of the dissemination that comes after it. So it's a very interesting consideration there. Next slide. All right, so Emily gave you a wheel of dissemination, the who, what, where, why, and how of dissemination that the AHRQ has presented. But we really wanted to break that down for you. And also the second wheel where, if you noticed, there was one of the circles was red around it, meaning draw attention to me. And it mentioned connecting with your community. And so when thinking about dissemination plans, it's always good to start with a model and to have a model. I like graphics. And so this graphic really spoke to me because it breaks dissemination and dissemination planning down into two phases. Sometimes we want to just jump to phase 2 at the end of our research. And at that point, it is too late. You don't have the time, resources, energy, anything that you need to do it successfully. And look at who is included in phase 1. Your community partners are involved, as well as the rest of your research team. So number 1, in phase 1, developing those partnerships. If you want to do the research, you have got to develop those partnerships. And so you need to make that the first step in dissemination and really in recruitment, your research protocol, all the way through to this phase. And forming a dissemination team, as Devin said, every single research subject, every single researcher, every single entity in the community is going to have a different perspective and a different lens. And if you rely on one person to do this for you, first of all, you're going to burn out. And second of all, it's not going to be representative of as well as you want it to be. So then phase 2 is the dissemination process. And that is, the first is to identify dissemination purpose. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're also going to talk about determining dissemination strategies. And then you can see that the last 2 phases are design and implement. But there's a commonality in this graphic, and that is around the outer corner, the outer circle, community input, community input, community input. And that is just why having a team is so essential. One other thing that I love about this graphic is that it's got a few things listed in the middle there: ethics, feasibility, communication, and did I say utility? And so it's really important to, when you're designing your dissemination strategy, hopefully up front and before anything really kicks off, hopefully you're designing it and putting it into your proposal up front. But it really forces you to think about these 4 components as part of the overall strategy. And so the first is ethics. And so ethics refers to conducting the dissemination process in a way that is acceptable and protects the welfare of the community. And so some of the ways that you're going to see this demonstrated is that there's respect for persons in the dissemination strategy. There's justice and beneficence. And so the whole tone of the dissemination strategy needs to reflect those. Feasibility. Feasibility ensures the dissemination process is practical. And so some of the ways that you're going to see this is that you're looking at capability and analysis of if what you want to do in your dissemination strategy is actually something that can happen. And so again, if you're not thinking this through, you may have a great idea, but you may not be able to fund it, or you may not be able to play it out because you just don't have the resources or the time or the people aligned in the correct way. Utility is ensuring that the dissemination process meets the needs of the stakeholders. Now, I ask you, when, as a researcher, I know that this has been a mistake of mine. When you think about the research, do you actually sit down and do an analysis of the stakeholders that touch your research? Usually we're thinking about the problem that we want to research. We're thinking about the direct subjects of our research, but are we really thinking about who is involved in this process and who needs to know what? So that's the utility part, and this is very important. Some of the things that demonstrate utility is culturally appropriate. So as Devin said and Aurelie said, if you're trying to recruit a certain type of community, you want your dissemination to reflect the community. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times that doesn't make it into the plan. Readability, the ability to be comprehended. We've talked about that in recruitment. It needs to be accurate, effective, and engaging. So those are some pretty tall bills to fill there. I know personally, engagement and making research exciting, sometimes it takes a little bit of an effort there. So we just need to build that into the overall strategy. And then having that communication and community input, really to make sure that all involved in the planning and that the final product is what it needs to be. So at this point, we're going to give you a snapshot just of what the different products could be. And one other thing that I love about this wheel, Emily's going to laugh at me because I just love this part of the model here, is you can see that if you travel around the model, the last part is, a product comes out. And so for each type of dissemination you want to do, it should result in some sort of product. And we're going to walk you through what those products look like, how to put that together in an actual plan, and then really dive deeply into the who, what, when, where, and why that we showed you in that first slide. So let's take a look at some of those.
All right, great. So I think this ties in nicely with Aurelie's talk. I know she mentioned a few of these platforms for recruitment, but they can also be used for dissemination as well. So again, these products and platforms, we've identified and used many of them in our past research. So this Cognet newsletter, this is a newsletter that goes out to our Cognet registry that I mentioned at the tail end of Aurelie's talk. It's a great way to inform community members of ongoing research findings, and ways in which they can get involved in different activities around the area. Using social media platforms at different community health centers, community hospitals, whatnot. Fillmore County is one of our PBRN sites, and they are always very eager to disseminate any research findings through their social media platforms, through their hospital webpage, all that information. So tapping into those community hospitals and health centers is great. We don't want to forget about the researchers. We talk a lot about the community, but it's also important to reach out to researchers. Maybe they have a similar research interest or are doing similar work. So making sure that we disseminate our findings back to the researchers as well through either UNMC Today or Nebraska Now. All of these are ways in which you can reach the researchers. Science cafes are something that we've talked about. I think Devin or Aurelie may have mentioned science cafes, but This is just a really informal presentation. It used to happen at the Slowdown prior to COVID, but they just invite community members to come and learn about a topic. September 21st, we had Dr. Thane Muntz. He's a pilot through the IDSCTR, and he talked about football and sports injuries. And we're going to use his study as an example throughout the rest of the talk. And then we also had a pilot talk at a North Omaha Community Care Council meeting. So these are all great options for disseminating findings and sharing results with the community members, research members, whoever it may be. There's lots of options out there. These are just a few. So the CDC has this really nice dissemination plan that helps you put together the pieces that are important to dissemination that we talked about earlier. So the what, when, whom, how. So all of these align with these different columns on the dissemination plan proposed by the CDC. So in a little bit, we are going to walk through a project and kind of fill in these different cells of the document to understand how you can match dissemination products with different community members, different audiences, and have them be at the appropriate time, which we talked about. Timing is everything. So keep this in mind. We're going to come back to this in a second, but I want to introduce the study that we're going to use as our example today. So like I said, Thane Muntz, he's a PhD researcher in South Dakota, I believe. And his pilot project is injury rates in physical activity in youth football. And he is comparing tackle versus flag football. So as you can imagine, the results of his pilot project have profound impacts on the community. Not only does it impact the football players, but it impacts the parents, it impacts the healthcare providers, it impacts those who watch football. So this is a really important study that we need to disseminate findings back to the community. So football is often accompanied by risk in younger athletes, as the effects of concussion and repetitive head injury can compromise brain development in youth. And it should be noted that 95% of tackle football players in the US are high school age or younger. So not many go on to play collegiate or in the NFL, but a majority of those football players are high school or younger, which is important to keep in mind, especially as that's the peak age for brain development. So one alternative to tackle football that has been recommended is flag football, as it can be a safer alternative and less physical impact. So Thane and his colleagues put GPS monitors on football players by choice. They consented to participate in the study, and they wore those GPS monitors during practice and games to measure their physical activity and impact during games, and then compared the results between tackle and flag football. So we're going to use this example as we go through dissemination planning, and Heidi is going to talk through some other ways in which you can consider identifying stakeholders and bringing stakeholders into the dissemination plan so that you're making sure that you really reach all your target audiences.
Okay, so far we've presented two models to you, and the models represent different components of the process. The one at the bottom is the entire dissemination planning process, and the one at the top that you see is, well, what do you put into the plan? And you're going to see later on that it's also, how do you track the plan? So what we wanted to do is just kind of walk you through how to use these things and what you're actually doing as you walk through. Obviously, it would be best practice if we all had experts in dissemination planning on our teams, but in reality, that's not possible all the time. And so if we walk you through how to do this, it'll really help you in putting these things into your proposals and then executing them. So as you can see at the bottom, the first step in the planning process of phase 2 is identifying a dissemination purpose, and you can see that that roughly aligns with the why and the what in the AHRQ model. So identifying the purpose, the why. So when you are disseminating, as Aurelie mentioned earlier, what is the purpose? What are you trying to tell the people? And there's really 3 general levels of this. The first is dissemination for awareness. And really this is for people who might be interested in what you're doing, but they don't necessarily, they're not really going to do a whole lot with that information. It's just for them to be aware of what's going on or what happened. And if you think about awareness, disseminating that out, this also could help with your recruitment down the line, because people are like, oh, I read about a study and the results of that study, and it looked really good. So maybe the next time that study or the next progression of that study comes down the pike, participants would be more willing to either participate or refer. The next one is dissemination for understanding. And this is a little bit deeper information about, well, what do they need to understand about the message, and how are they going to incorporate that into your project plan. So in other words, if this is dissemination to a group that is directly related to your topic, and you want them to do something with that, you want them to understand what your study was about and what the findings mean. So if you're, for example, if you're doing something on healthy eating for folks with high blood pressure or something like that, you would want them to understand what the results of your study were, and then maybe they could take that and incorporate it into their daily life. There's a fine line here between understanding and action. Action is the highest level, where you want people to take that information and do something with it. You want the information to influence people to do something, to bring about a change, to participate or do some sort of active motion with the information. So next slide. All right, so the next step is determine dissemination strategies. And you want to talk about, okay, now that we kind of know the purpose, who are we disseminating it to? And then matching the purposes with the who's. And so the oval there is stakeholders. And so you really want to come up with a list of stakeholders. So you've got external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and then those that are connected to your study in some way, but not necessarily actively involved at the time. So if we were to think about the study that Emily put forward about concussion and young football players, who are some of the folks, of the stakeholders that would be involved in that study? Who would we want to think about when coming up with a dissemination strategy? And you can put them in the chat. You can just shout them out. Who are some of those? And Emily, if we could maybe just open up like a text box and just put 2 to 3 of those in there, that would be fantastic. Players, coaches, sports associations. That's the 3 that we have so far. Parents, school administration, coaches. I think for the sake of time, that's probably enough. And then Emily, if you could copy that and bring it to the next slide. I think for the sake of time, we're going to work through this together. But this is another diagram that helps you really think about, all right, we know the purposes of dissemination, awareness, understanding, and then you can see at the bottom, action has kind of been broken out into support and involvement as well. Just saying action, you can break these into subcategories as well. But so let's look at players. For the research findings that we saw in the presentation of the football study, which bucket do we think the players should belong into? Awareness, understanding, or action?
Probably action.
If the research findings are saying that wearing a device for each player and some of the protective mechanisms, yes, action. We have awareness and action, understanding, all three. And so if we're putting them in each bucket, what kind of dissemination messaging is going to come of that? How are you going to design your messaging knowing that we need to be made, the players need to be made aware of something, they need to understand something, and then they need to do something? How is that going to affect the dissemination product that you put out after considering it? And that's a totally rhetorical question. We could come up with lots of different things. Now let's go to, let's just say parents. Would parents be awareness, understanding, action? Would it be one versus another? Yeah, I'm not sure what action the parents would need to be doing at this point, integrating whatever the subsequent changes would be. But they definitely would need to be made aware. They definitely would need to be understanding. Now, what about, we say coaches here, and so we're assuming football coaches, but what about, say, a basketball coach? Would a basketball coach be awareness, understanding, or action? What do we think? All three? One could argue that if you're in a different sport, maybe the research findings of the football study don't directly apply to the sports that you are coaching, but the knowledge about concussion, the knowledge about injury, those would definitely be things that you need to be made aware of. So again, you can see that although it may seem obvious, it's the who and the what and the call to action is another name for it, is going to drive what your dissemination messaging looks like and to whom and how it happens. So I think the same thing about Dr. King's partner in crime right there. All right, can you just go on to the next one, Emily? The next slide. Oh, isn't that fun? So in dissemination planning, now we're going to the how and the when. We're still in the planning process, that second stage of the wheel. And when we think about what the purpose is, when we think about what we want each stakeholder to do with that information, now we need to pick the best way to get that information to them. So here are some different strategies. Media coverage, press release, you all have this pretty well defined as we were looking at this before. Flyers, posters, brochures, research briefs, policy briefs, study newsletters, all sorts of different mechanisms. But here's another one, hopefully is already integrated into your dissemination and your protocol, is letter of thanks to study participants, making sure that anyone that helped you out along the way not only is thanked, but knows the results of the study. And then the last box in the circle here from AHRQ is when, and that is are we going to give this information to them one time? Is one time enough? Or is this going to be reoccurring? And if it's reoccurring, what's the schedule that you're going to use to disseminate? And how are you going to make sure that that schedule is kept? And what resources do you need to have multiple disseminations of that message? So again, you can see that the planning is something that needs to be done as part of the initial process. Okay, next slide.
Perfect. So now that Heidi's given us a really nice overview of dissemination planning and some key considerations when developing a plan, we can go back to that CDC table that I proposed earlier on in the talk, and we can kind of start plugging in some information based off of our stakeholders and the type of dissemination that we're interested in. So for Thane's study, this was actually the dissemination plan that the CEO Corps helped develop for him, with him. So the first thing under products, he gave a presentation at a science cafe. So the audience there was the public, and then it was recorded on Facebook, which was great. So anyone can go back and watch that presentation. Something else that we talked about was in the fall time. So again, thinking about prior to football season starting, attending a parents meeting regarding athletics and the football program, so that he could give some information about the study that he conducted and the findings to better inform the parents so that they can help their child make the best action, and some of those other things that Heidi talked about in that diagram. Then there were some written products as well. So a CTR blog that went out to all of the CTR members. And then our PBRN, or Practice-Based Research Network newsletter, which reaches currently over 70 clinics across the state. For different parts of the state, maybe your primary care physician is who's going to be advising you on whether or not you should participate in sports and what types of sports you should participate in and the risk benefits of doing sports. So having the primary care providers in the state aware of this research is really important too, so that it can help them be able to give accurate and informative advice to their patients. So like I said, that dissemination plan for Dr. Muntz was created in help with the Community Engagement and Outreach Corps for the IDEA CTR. And this is a service that we provide to all of our members through our consultations. And so it's a great way to learn more and to be taught about engagement methodology, how to identify the key stakeholders that are specific to your research, and how to communicate with those different stakeholder groups. As Heidi pointed out, based off the stakeholder, there might be a different message or different action that comes out of that. And so we can help you to craft the best product for those different stakeholder groups. And so I did include the link on this slide here to request a consultation. You can also access this information on the IDEA CTR website. Heidi, did you have anything else to add?
I do want to mention that for the methods of dissemination, we had a list in the slide, but if you have access to a PR office, or we have Office of Strategic Communication here at UNMC, there's usually templates for each of those that you can use to build out those dissemination products. Some of the resources that we've listed in the slides that are talking about those products have templates as well. So these things can really help you if you're looking at the templates, they guide you in what you need to know and who you need to engage with as well to make those things happen. And I also want to say that if you are partnering with the IDEA CTR Corps, this is really, it's more than just the information. It's also engaging in a network that has ties with many different communities and partnerships. And so, as you know, it's always easier to connect and recruit and disseminate when you have an inside, I guess is the best way to say that. So just know that that there are lots of resources for you to look at individually, and that the office is here if you need help in any of these things.
Just real quickly, I wanted to provide a link to our Practice-Based Research Network. It was a resource that we had described in regards to a research study that was done, but there are lots of benefits to our PBRN, or Practice-Based Research Network, for researchers and community members as well. So just to provide a brief overview, it is a dedicated network of clinics, clinicians, and investigators who are really coming together with a shared mission and vision to overcome healthcare challenges in primary care and improve the health of everyone living in the Great Plains. And so this can be used both for recruitment and also dissemination. So down here in the corner, I have a little screenshot of our news and events, but we try and come out with the quarterly newsletter. And this is basically a dissemination avenue for research findings, for teaching and mentoring opportunities, for seminars and webinars that people can attend, for other dissemination and training opportunities. So we really have a number of resources through our PBRN. And it's also a great way to partner with clinics to conduct your research so that you make sure that your findings are generalizable and that you can disseminate that work back into the community. And again, this is all this information can be found on our Great Plains IDEA CTR website, and the link is included here on the slide. And finally, I know we've provided a lot of information to you both tonight and also over the course of the Institute. So we are creating a webpage that'll have all of the training documents, the recordings, the PowerPoints, and any supplemental materials and resources that we have alluded to throughout our talks. All of this will be made available on the website. So if you didn't catch something or you missed a link, you can find it all on the website, and I'll be sure to send out the link to that webpage as soon as we get it published. And then, like I said, Heidi did a great job collecting all of these resources, and I think she had a lot of fun going through all of the literature out there. So we have compiled all of our resources, and we'll be sure to include this link on the website.
Emily, great job. LaDonna asked if you could share the link in the chat, I think to the consultations. And
yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong.
In the chat right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's the takeaway message is ultimately we want to connect you with the resources and the help that you need. And so we're always posting new and relevant things on the website. But you can always reach out to any of us to ask more questions and get more information as well. So thank you, everyone. Are there any questions?
Yes, I do have a question, as usual. So I have an ongoing study, which is a neuroimaging study, and I collaborate with UNL. So just to summarize, it looks at the cognitive advantages of learning a new language and whether possibly that can have an impact in improving cognition in older adults and possibly kind of postpone cognitive decline in them. So it is more like a big scientific hypothesis that I do not feel comfortable putting out the message out there in the community. Is like kind of giving out the wrong message that, hey, if you learn a new language, then you'll be fine and you will never get Alzheimer's disease. So I was approached by UNL. I think the journal is called Well-Being or Well-Living. It is a magazine that goes out to everybody in Lincoln area for 50 plus. I reached out to them to see if I could put an ad there, and then they said, we want to do an interview with you about this project, and we want to basically publish an article. And I told them, okay, let me think about this and I will get back to you. And the reason is because I didn't want to be giving any, wrong or false messages out there. But at the same time, I can understand that this could be, really beneficial to me, especially that I'm having a lot of trouble recruiting the participants that I want because I'm really looking for a very narrow population. So what are your thoughts? That's number one. And number two, would I need the IRB approval of the exact text that I'm putting there, or even a general approval of, I already have the language in there that says, I will be giving talk to the public. I will be putting information about my study in different social media. But I wondered if I needed to have the exact language. Maybe this is a more IRB question, but I really wanted to know the limits of you know, what we mean by dissemination and what can we do, what cannot we do?
Well, that's a very complex question because whenever you're talking about media, it is actually talking with media is an expertise in its own right. And you should never go to the media if you are affiliated with an organization alone. You always want to talk to the Office of Strategic Communication, PR, and get their advice on that. Because media has a way, if you're not, and even if you are completely explicit about the message that you're putting out there, sometimes the media have a message that they want to put out there for you. So you need to get in touch with those that are experts in disseminating that and making sure that if you agree to do that, then there are limits as to, okay, if I'm going to do this for you, then you're going to let me see what you're going to put out there, or I need to be informed of what you're going to do pre-publication so that you can make sure that A, it's what you want to put out there, and B, you're not violating IRB. And I'm going to actually kick this to Devin and Aurelie too, because I know you've dealt with this a lot.
And I can just say real quickly from experience, so we dealt with something very similar in one of our newsletters to our CogNet participants. So over the summer, aducanumab kind of blew up the media with some of these claims that, you know, it was beneficial for individuals with early onset Alzheimer's, and that individuals with cognitive impairment could benefit from this drug. And there was a lot of mixed results in the media. And so in our newsletter, we thought about addressing this. And again, it came with a lot of pros and cons. And ultimately what we decided is to write up a little blurb, because UNMC was becoming a phase 4 clinical trial site for the drug, that we did want to acknowledge that this was an opportunity and to just lay out the facts. So we kept it strictly factual. You know, this is the drug, this is what it's used for, this is who it's been studied in, and just keep all it, like, it needs to be just facts. No opinions, no, you know, other advice. We didn't have the neurologist weigh in on it. And it was written from a neurologist perspective. And we just said, here are the facts. This is the trial, and this is who we're recruiting. And we did run it by the IRB. So anytime we send out any materials that a participant could see, we always get an IRB approved. It's a great way just to protect yourself and make sure that the information that you are disseminating is just that, factual, to the point, and no outside opinions.
And you mentioned too that because it's a study theory, you know, I don't want to say limited, but the fact is you want to disseminate a hypothesis, or, you know, what you're thinking. And what I would say is that put your 2 to 3 ideas about what you want to communicate directly. And if this is a live interview, you always want to go back, no matter what they ask you. Never do a hanging yes or no. First of all, it always has to be, never say yes or no. Always go back to those 2 to 3 facts that you want to put out there word for word, no matter what is asked. So those are some of the tips that we have for that situation.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
I totally agree with all of those comments, and I think it's challenging. I would definitely, LaDonna, I would take those ideas to both, you know, your communications folks and your IRB jointly. And I think it's a challenge, like when you're finishing a study and you have products and you're disseminating versus recruiting through that media or medium, I guess I should say, or both, I guess. It's challenging, right, to figure out what that messaging is. Yes, I think those are great tips, and I would second all of them. And if you can provide like a written something to folks over a live interview, sometimes that's at least in our experience, we have tried to do those types of things too, so that you don't end up getting in a loop of a conversation live that then can go in a direction that's unanticipated and not productive.
And there are templates for the written one too. There are press release templates to keep you on the right path, to make sure your message gets out there exactly the way you want it.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add is we do also have media trainings when researchers are being interviewed for certain projects or studies. So that training is through Vicky Serino, and it's literally walks you through everything that you need to know, how the media could kind of trick you into saying something that you don't want to say. So I think that's good, especially when you're putting out your study for the first time and it's something like that's getting traction and you're being interviewed. So having that media training would be very beneficial through Vicky Serino.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And the trainings are done through the Office of Communication. Is that true?
Yeah, strategic communications.
Thank you.